Alicia. Welcome back. If you're new here, welcome as well. I wanted to sit down and chat with you today about another frequently asked question that I get a lot of times on my IVF videos. The question is whether we genetically tested our embryos. We did IVF back in 2018, and back then they called it PGS testing. The more common term now is PGTA testing, pre-implantation genetic testing for aneuploidies. I think I'm saying that right. So PGT is easier to say. So because I'm more familiar with the term PGS, I may say that more than I say PGT, but it is essentially the same thing. So basically it's a test to check for any chromosome abnormalities in your embryos. Me and my husband did IVF back in June of 2018. We made the decision to just go directly and do IVF versus trying intrauterine insemination or IUI, even though I did highly consider doing IUI first because quite frankly it's less expensive, less invasive, and our insurance didn't cover any fertility. So, you know, being out of pocket, of course I wanted to try that first. But we were only given a 10% success rate because I was about 3 months shy of being 39. And since it hasn't worked for us just naturally in 11 years, doctor highly recommended just not wasting time and money and just going directly to IVF. So that's what we decided to do. So we did a 2-cycle plan where we did 2 egg retrievals. So from the egg retrievals, they were able to collect a total of 9 eggs. And out of the 9 eggs, 8 made it to expanded blastocysts that were frozen on day 5 and day 6. We did our frozen embryo transfer of 2 of our highest graded embryos in September of 2018, and we now have healthy baby boys who just turned 3 actually. Some of the appointments that I would have with my doctor when he was doing ultrasounds and just checking my follicle growth, I always would bring a list of questions. And one of the questions one time was, do you recommend that we do PGS testing on our embryos? Because that's what we called it back then. And he said no. The reason why he said no was he didn't expect to get a lot of eggs out of me because I had low ovarian reserve, and he didn't anticipate getting a lot of embryos. He actually was surprised that we were able to get 8 embryos from the 9 eggs that we had, just based on my age. So he really just didn't want to mess with them too much, and I didn't really exactly know what he meant by that until I did a little bit more research. But the way he put it to me, even though I believe there was more to it as I did more research into this, was we were already gonna have to pay for a second amount of medication, which was very expensive. And as it was, the testing was $6,500. So he said I would just save my money if I were you and just put it towards the extra medication you're gonna have to buy because you're doing 2 rounds. And you know, the embryos will work themselves out. If there's something wrong with the embryo, it either won't implant or you will have a miscarriage. So, but he said, of course, if you want to do the testing, it's up to you. You know, it's your money, but I don't recommend it. I trusted my doctor, and I was going to trust what he recommended. And so after discussing with my husband, we decided that we would not move forward with PGS testing. But I wanted to do a little research to make sure that we were making the right decision. I still wanted to be informed. And so what I did was I wanted to find out the cons of doing PGS testing. So I didn't research a lot of articles that were super pro PGS or PGT testing. I more looked for the cons because I wanted to justify or feel better about my decision to not do it, because I thought for sure we were going to get recommended to do PGS testing. One article that really stuck out to me, and if I'm able to find this, I will link it below, a study that they did. They took a group of women that had undergone IVF and they tested their embryos. They didn't just test it in one location, they tested it in 3 different locations. One thing that was remarkable was that it was inconsistent. Each clinic was saying a different thing about these ladies' embryos. Some were saying certain ones were abnormal while the other ones were saying that they were normal. So that was kind of interesting. And then the second thing that was very profound to me is what they did was they took the agreed upon abnormal embryos and did a transfer of those embryos into the women. So they transferred the abnormal ones. 80% of the women ended up having live births of healthy children. So these embryos that would have been, or that were deemed abnormal, ended up still working and creating a baby. So that really got me thinking, like, I wonder why that was. And so I read more and did a little bit more research into it. With PGT, what they do is they extract a few cells on the outside of the embryo, just about 4 or 5 cells from the outside of the embryo. That part is called the trifectoderm, and that would later develop into the placenta. They do never take any cells from the center because that's the inner cell mass, and that would later become the baby. Some embryos are what they call mosaics. So a mosaic is an embryo that is a mixture of both abnormal and normal cells. There has been research that has proven that mosaics can self-correct. And what usually happens is that if there's any abnormal chromosomally off cells, they're usually pushed to the outside of the embryo. And that's exactly where PGT pulls from. So there is a potential that this embryo, which was a mosaic, could have possibly self-corrected or was self-correcting, but there were still abnormal cells in that trifectoderm that was removed and tested. And so those embryos were discarded, even though maybe potentially, not guaranteed, but maybe potentially that could have been a baby. I feel like in my case, since I did not have a lot of embryos to start with, that I didn't want to take the chance that some of my embryos would be discarded. If one of my embryos turned out to be chromosomally abnormal, my clinic would not have implanted them. So for me, the risk of losing embryos and not being able to try them out was higher than going ahead and doing a transfer and taking my chance on having a miscarriage. Now, as far as I know, I have never been pregnant prior to my twins. It is possible that I was having chemical pregnancies because I did have a chemical pregnancy about a year after my twins were here. It was very, very early. So it is possible, but I mean, coming from someone who never had a miscarriage, I'm sure it's easy for me to say, but for me, I would rather take the risk of having a miscarriage than not having as many embryos to try. So yeah, that was our decision. So, and I'm glad that I made that decision. This video definitely is not to knock PGS testing or PGT testing. I know someone, Laura Laws here on YouTube is a friend of mine. She did PGS testing and also the ERA test, and that's absolutely the reason why she has her beautiful daughter now. So everyone's situation is different. I think our biggest challenge with getting pregnant naturally was because of my fibroids. I think that had a lot to do with it. So I don't know if the quality of my eggs were poor. So there's all kinds of different factors to consider. And you know, I'm just sharing my story, but you absolutely, if this is something that you're concerned with, discuss it with your doctor, do your research, read the pros and cons. I think it's important to know about the pros and cons. You know, I didn't have any kind of medical conditions like PCOS, endometriosis. I didn't have anything like that. So all those are things to consider when you want to genetically test your embryos or not. So, but in my case, it was better that we didn't. I hope that was helpful to you, but if I didn't answer any of your questions, you're still kind of left with wanting to know more, please leave a comment below. But thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe if you're new, and I will see you real soon in the next video. Take care.
You're a rebel, getting into trouble. You are kind of